I have a runny nose all the time. It is super frustrating, and I've been told by numerous general practitioners that I have allergies. But you know me, I want to know what kind of allergies I have because I'm taking over-the-counter medicines all the friggin' time. So I talked to my doctor, and they referred me to an allergist. And man, y'all, I was not ready. I heard about, quote, full panels before, but I've never really looked into what goes on when you get one. I was scratched, I was poked, and I had more shots that day than I'd had in the past decade. It was pretty miserable. But in case you're curious, as it turns out, I wasn't allergic to a single thing. I was truly shocked. Turns out, my nose runs just because it likes to. But there are a lot of you out there who have real allergies. Runny nose, watery eyes, itchy skin, headaches, the whole lot. What exactly is happening here? Let's talk about seasonal allergies. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Gita Fleischman, an ENT with WakeMed. Welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And you are here just in the nick of time because we're talking about seasonal allergies. And in North Carolina, the allergies are for real. Like, especially the pine. Like, the amount of pollen we get with pine is insane.
It really is. It's so insane you can see it.
So let's just start from the beginning. Why do we have allergies?
Yeah, so allergies are basically body's reaction or a wrong reaction to something that's not actually dangerous, but the body thinks is dangerous. So instead of reacting to something like a virus or a bacteria, it sees a pollen particle or it sees dander and sort of thinks that it's something terrible and mounts a big immune response to it.
So is that evolutionarily speaking why they evolved is because we were trying to protect ourselves?
That's exactly it. Yep. So it's sort of a false alarm.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I need to know, and I think most people need to know, because I always, every year, get confused by this. So much so I actually went to an allergist recently because I couldn't tell. How do you know you're having allergies as opposed to having a cold?
Yeah, and that's a great question. The symptoms overlap a lot, right? Because it's basically the same response that the body's putting out.
Yes.
So allergies typically are very predictable for most people. They happen around the same time every year, and they usually coincide with like pollen counts, or whether it's tree pollen, grass pollen. In some people, they'll know they have cat or dog allergies, and they were around a cat or dog. So sometimes just the predictability, the pattern can tell you. Also, usually with allergies, people don't actually feel fatigue or malaise or fevers, things like that. So usually with allergies, the symptoms people will complain about are itchiness, sneezing, a stuffy nose, maybe a little bit of a dry cough, things like that.
Okay, I feel tired when I have allergies. It definitely runs me down.
For sure. And in some people, allergies can kind of become an infection, right? Because it
That was my next question.
Yep, because it can, especially in the sinuses, it can cause inflammation. It can cause a lot of mucus to be produced. And sometimes that can get trapped, and then that can turn into a viral infection, or it can turn into sinusitis.
So the best course of action when you're trying to decide is, especially if you're young, because tell me, like for me, I didn't start getting these symptoms of allergies until I was older. Mm-hmm. And so is that a common thing that you may not have them when you're young or vice versa?
Oh, truly. Allergies can kind of appear and disappear at different parts of the life. You can actually change your allergy patterns as you get older. So if we test a 5-year-old, they may not have the same allergies as they do when they're 30 or 50.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. So a doctor's appointment with an allergist or a ENT, I mean, does it take longer than normal? To go get it's like you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, it sounds like.
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of great ways to test for allergies now. You can do something as simple as a blood test. You give a vial of blood, and it can test you for the most common allergens in the area that you live in. So even if you, let's say, move from the West Coast to the East Coast, the things you're allergic to change because the environment's different.
Oh.
So sometimes I have patients who will move from a different state, and we'll just redo the allergy testing, and we'll test for different things.
Okay, so let's say I have some symptoms. Like the common symptoms, like you said, are like itchy eyes and maybe itchy skin, getting that dry cough. What are some unexpected symptoms? with that you may have and don't realize that could mean an allergy. And by the way, we're not talking food allergy here. We're talking seasonal allergies.
Yeah, the most common thing, again, are itchy eyes, runny eyes, redness of the eyes, lots of runny nose, nasal congestion, but people can also get a dry cough because the same thing that's happening in the nose, in the airways of the nose and sinuses, is happening in your lungs too. So sometimes people can get a little bit of worsening of mild asthma. They can get more reactive airways. Things like that. Some people can actually have worsening of their, symptoms of sinusitis. So if someone is already,
what is sinusitis?
So infection of the sinuses,
okay.
like a bad cold. Truly, like be a little more likely to get a virus or hang on to that viral infection or hang on to that bacterial infection.
Well, yeah, because I had a doctor one time tell me, I say a doctor. I had numerous doctors tell me, girl, you have allergies. And because I kept getting a sinus infection every single, November. Every November I got, and they were like, you have allergies. Like, no, I don't. And they're like, yeah, you do. If you would treat these, you wouldn't get the sinus infection. And so I finally bought Flonase, and I didn't get a sinus infection for years. So what about nosebleeds? Is that a sign?
Yes. So some people can get nosebleeds. And the reason being that, when you have too much mucus production, right, that mucus will eventually dry out, especially when the seasons are changing. You have a cold day, a warm day, heat's on, heat's off. And the mucus basically turns into, the technical term is booger. And that booger
it's in the books that way.
Books. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the booger sort of gets stuck on the tissues of the nose. And when you either pick it or blow your nose or, kind of rub your nose, that booger sort of falls off. But it also takes the top layer of skin off the nose.
And it
causes nosebleeds because all the beautiful blood vessels in the nose get exposed and people are just a little more likely.
Is the skin thinner in your nose than elsewhere?
It is. It's very thin.
Okay.
So at certain parts of the nose. Mm-hmm.
I see. What about brain fog? Because I don't know about you, but sometimes, and granted, being women and hormones also comes with brain fog, but can allergies cause brain fog?
Certainly. I think it's all the inflammatory things that are released, right? Allergies are just a big cascade of inflammation that occurs. So when you have all of that so close to the brain, you can get brain fog, similar to when you get bad sinus infection or a head cold, right? It's the same thing that can cause sort of just feeling stuffy and not being able to breathe well, not being able to think properly.
Now, do you know why we get brain fog?
I don't have a great answer for that. I think it's just sort of the body trying to take all its resources and trying to tone down this inflammation that's very in the head and neck, which is very close to the brain.
So it sacrifices blood to the brain, puts it towards where it needs to heal?
Potentially.
Yeah,
Potentially.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that. Okay. Let's talk about treatments.
Uh-huh.
What can we do if every single year, come spring, when the trees decide to spread their love dust all over the place,
yes.
What can I do to combat that?
Sure. I mean, first thing is sort of being aware of what you're allergic to, right? So sometimes you can look at pollen counts and say, hey, are the grass counts really high? Grass pollen. Are the tree pollen counts really high? Is it pine pollen, which is that big, huge pollen we see? Because there's all different types, right?
Sure.
So just awareness and avoidance, knowing that pollen counts are super high in the morning. They're much higher when it's windy. Mm-hmm.
Why is it higher in the morning?
Because that's when the pollen's released by.
See, these are insider tips.
Yes, exactly. And then if you are kind of in contact with it, maybe washing your hands, kind of changing your clothes if you know that you were out and you got all the pollen on you. And then the next step is sort of getting rid of some of the pollen that may be in the nose before you hit the medicines, right? And you can do sinus washes. You can over-the-counter neti pots, Navage, things like that, just to kind of wash the nose. It's kind of like getting your hands really dirty in mud, right? Instead of just using alcohol or something, you actually want to wash it off. And that's what the saline stuff does.
Oh.
Yeah. And then once you've done that, you can use things like an intranasal steroid like Flonase or Rhinocort. There's also really good intranasal antihistamine sprays like Astelin or Astapro. And together with Flonase, which is a steroid, they actually work beautifully to help with some of the allergy symptoms.
When you said you have to look for the pollen counts, well, that would take going to the doctor to find out what exactly you're allergic to. Because I could see tree pollen and be like, that's up.
Yeah.
What does that mean for me?
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you think that you should go to the doctor?
If you've tried the over-the-counter medications such as your antihistamines, your nasal steroids, your nasal washes, and you're still finding that your symptoms are poorly controlled, that's one reason, just to identify. If you're finding that you're having to be on these medications all year round without an ability to stop, maybe finding out if you have not just seasonal but perennial or year-round allergies, things like dust mites, things like dogs, cats, things like that.
Oh, dust mites would do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Similar symptoms, exactly.
Well, my stepmother, she has to get shots. What are the shots that people get for allergies?
Yeah, so it's basically, the technical word is immunotherapy or allergen desensitization. And what that is they're microscopic amounts of the allergen that are injected into the skin to basically tell your body, hey, I'm going to be around for a long time. You don't have to react so aggressively. I'm not bad. So once allergists can identify what you're allergic to, what they can do is basically give you tiny little amounts on a weekly basis to kind of desensitize that. And you can do either shots or you can do what's called sublingual, which is drops of the allergen under your tongue.
Interesting. It's kind of like vaccines.
It's exactly.
Yeah, interesting. I went to the allergist recently because I have a runny nose all the time. And I was like, what am I allergic to? Came back, I'm not allergic to anything. What is that all about?
Yeah, so there's different types of runny nose, and the word for that is rhinitis. You can have allergic rhinitis, that's related to allergies, or you could have non-allergic, and that's
what he told me I
vasomotor, which is basically just leaky blood vessels in the nose, or it could
leaky
be
blood vessels. How does that make my nose run? And that sounds like a nosebleed.
Yeah, but it's not the blood coming off. It's just fluid that's sort of seeping out.
What kind of fluid?
It's just body fluid, just normal watery body. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is you could have not just an allergy, but you could just be reacting to normal irritants, whether it's smoke in the environment, carpet fibers, things like that. So it doesn't have to be an organic particle that we test for, but it could just be something you're irritated with. And there are other things you could be allergic to that we just don't have a great way in medicine to test for.
I see. Well, and my nose also runs when I eat.
Yes. So that's very classic for vasomotor rhinitis. And there are different sprays you can use for that.
You said Flonase was a good one.
It was good, but Atrovent usually works really well too.
Writing that down. Atrovent. Atrovent.
And you do need a prescription for that one.
Oh, that's we'll talk about that off air. Okay. Some people work well with Zyrtec. Some people work well with Flonase. Some with Claritin. Why does it seem, and is it just a seem, or is this actually true that some people's allergies respond better to different medications?
And it truly can. And it's not just the responding to the medications, but it's also looking at the side effect profile, because there's oral antihistamines, right? There's first generation, second generation. So the Claritin, Zyrtec, Allegra, those are usually what we call second generation. They're antihistamines.
What was the first one? First generation.
First generation are sort of like in that Benadryl category. Yeah, they kind of make you a little bit sleepy. They're a little less selective in the receptors, or sort of like what they act on.
I see.
So basically what happens is that with Claritin, Zyrtec, Allegra, these kinds, it basically doesn't make you as sleepy. It gives you slightly less side effects because it's a little more focused on the receptors that are triggering that allergic response, right? And a lot of these medications also have you can buy over the counter just Claritin or Claritin D. And the D component is usually a pseudoephedrine, something that, is a little bit of a stimulant. So it decongests you, but in the long run, it's not something you want to be on. But
that was my next question, because that sounds like something you don't want to be on. And speaking of, you weren't finished. Please go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah. And exactly. So basically, that's good for a short term. Like you're really stuffy. Something really unusual happened where, you're allergic to cats and you're around cats.
Sure.
So you need a little extra.
Right.
I think it's fine for short term, about a week or so. But after that, you really want to just stick with your run-of-the-mill, just the antihistamine, whether it's Claritin, Zyrtec, Allegra, things like that.
Well, I was also told by a doctor, but then it was kind of counterpointed, I'm going to use that word, by my allergist. Can Flonase burn a hole in your nose?
So it technically can't burn a hole in the nose, but because if you use it pointing too much towards the septum or the middle part of the nose, it can thin out the tissue, thin out the skin, and it can trigger nosebleeds. So you want to actually aim it a little bit towards the inner corner of your eye, the eye on the side that you have it in, so that it goes onto the sides of the nose where the mucus-producing glands are. Okay. So, but yeah, it can cause nosebleeds, but typically, only if you're pointing it incorrectly or if you've just been using it for a really long time and it's hitting the same spot.
Yeah, I try to vary it, but yeah, I was terrified of using it at all after she's like, yeah, it can burn a hole in your nose. I was like, oh dear God. And then it's a little less drastic than that, so that makes sense. If I have been, speaking of being on something for a long time, if I have been on, say, Claritin for 20 years, maybe not 20 years, let's go with 2 years, can it become less effective, and do I need to switch to Zyrtec at that point?
It can become a little less effective for some people, but if you find that it's working well, you can keep using it. If not, you can just switch to a different brand where it's just a slightly different molecular makeup and see if that works a little bit better.
And is it because of that different molecular makeup that it works better for some and not others?
It can, yes.
And do some work for different allergies better than others?
No, not the data doesn't show that. For the most part, they're all, antihistamines. They work
see.
well, but even within then, so there are newer medications like Xyzal that are just slightly more selective than the original 3 that I mentioned. So it's a little bit of a trial and error. Some work better for some people and some don't.
Okay, so you say whenever we have a cat, right? Or if you have an allergy to a cat or a dog and you're having a bad day, let's just say you don't have the decongestant version available. Can I take 2 allergy pills?
Yeah, you can take 2 allergy pills. That's fine. I mean, you don't want to do it long term, but usually, most of them are between 5 and 10 milligrams.
Okay.
Once in a while, it is totally fine to take two at a time. In a very short period, you can also use afrin in the nose. Again, you don't want to use it long term.
Afrin, I heard, is bad.
Yes, you don't want to use it more than 2 to 3 days because it truly your nose becomes hungry for it. You kind of get used to it, and then you need it all the time. So afrin is a nasal spray. It's very similar to Sudafed. It's the liquid version of it. It's either oxymetazoline or phenylephrine, and you spray it in the nose, and pretty much within 10 to 15 seconds, it sort of shrinks the nose, and you can breathe really well.
Oh, okay.
And people love it. The problem is they love it too much, and after about 3 to 4 days, the receptors or the targets of afrin basically multiply, and every time you use it, they multiply more.
Oh.
So all of a sudden, you get in the situation where you have to use afrin multiple times a day, otherwise you can't breathe. So again, okay for 2 to 3 days, not
That
more
sounds
than
like
that.
it should be prescription.
There's a fine print in the back of the box that says do not use for more than 3 days.
Know what?
I agree. Yeah.
A lot of people don't read that.
Most people don't.
Yeah, no, they think it's over the counter. It's very safe.
And it works.
And it does work.
And what's interesting is it's not just under the brand name Afrin. There's a lot of other nasal sprays that if you just read the ingredients, you'll find that they've added those 2 ingredients, oxymetazoline or phenylephrine, to the other stuff in the nasal spray. So people don't even realize that they're essentially using it.
Yikes.
They just feel like they found something that finally works.
And then they're hooked on it.
And then they're hooked on it.
Yeah, that sounds like a certain crisis of the O variety that's been going on.
Yes.
That's crazy. And just after 3 days, that's so quick. Mm-hmm. Does drinking water help? Like, are there any non-medicinal things that we can do to help clear and keep ourselves healthy during times when we know allergies are going to affect us?
Yeah, I mean, drinking water it's always good. It kind of helps clear any allergens that may be in the back of the throat. A lot of people like to buy filters for their home or kind of change the air filters in the air conditioner more frequently.
Yeah, that makes sense. I always forget to do that.
Yeah, I think everybody does. But those things can help. And again, some of the other things I talked about, like the nasal sinus lavage, kind of washing things out.
Never heard it called as a lavage. It's so French.
I know, it's a very fancy term. We put it in our notes to make them sound more professional.
I like it. Well, I think that covers my questions.
Okay.
But don't fret. We have listener questions. And these are always a grab bag because, the anonymousness of the internet makes people quite brave. So here we go. First question, seasonal allergies. I've heard local honey helps with seasonal allergies. Is that true?
I don't know that. That's a really good question. I'll have to look into that, actually.
Really? You've never heard that? I've actually heard that, too.
I have. Everything that we sort of recommend has to have data behind it. So I will have to check and see if there's actual data. It sort of does make sense because bees feast on sort of local organic things like pollen or, so it's possible that some of those are passed into the honey, but I would have to look into that. I'm not sure.
My guess is you'd have to use a lot of it.
Yes.
That would be my guess. All right. Next question. Do allergens differ from year to year like flu strains?
So the allergen counts can differ from year to year depending on whether it was a warm winter, whether or not, there have been non-native plants that have been moved to the area. So the counts can truly differ, but typically, generally speaking, the actual molecule, the actual pollen, allergen itself doesn't change that much.
So we had a really warm winter this year, so we should be in for a doozy.
Yes, and also it'll be earlier. So the allergy season starts earlier because the trees are blooming earlier, the grass is sprouting earlier.
Silver lining though, it's going to end earlier. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Oh, this is a good question. Will there ever be an annual shot that I can take for seasonal allergies?
I think that would be unlikely because there's so many different types of allergens, right? So, and in this area, if you kind of say the basic North Carolina panel only tests you for about 26, but those are just the main ones. So I think it would be unlikely, kind of like a vaccine, right? That they can just put in, just because it's not necessarily a virus or anything that you're encountering.
It's too individual.
Exactly,
Sounds like.
It's very individual.
Yeah. So, what are the major triggers in North Carolina?
So there's the different grasses: Bermuda grass, Kentucky grass, bluegrass, Timothy grass. There's pine.
Timothy grass.
I know. I had to look it up. Molds. Also a lot of trees. So elm, hickory, maple, oak. Believe it or not, the pine pollen, even though we see it and it's really sort of feels like it's dust.
It's disgusting.
A lot of people, it's not necessarily the allergy from pine pollen because it's such a big particle.
You can literally see it.
You can see it, and it usually gets filtered out early on, like in front of the nose. So there's actually less of an allergy to pine than people think. That's more of an irritant because it's almost like you're breathing dust.
And speaking of irritant, does skin ever show signs of seasonal allergies?
Sure, yeah. A lot of people can get redness around the eyes. They can sometimes get red, like just kind of breakdown around the nose. But usually, at least in my world, what I see is mostly runny eyes, itchy nose, sneezing,
no
cough.
rashes.
You can get them, but it's unlikely just because most of this is inhaled, right?
I see.
So it's basically where the particles are hitting your body. See, if there's a skin allergy, it's usually a contact allergy from lotions or from perfumes or something that they're directly putting on the skin or contacting the skin.
So seasonal allergies won't give you a contact rash?
Generally not for most people.
Well, that's fortunate.
Yeah.
Few things that are fortunate. Well, I feel a lot more prepared for the onslaught of all the love dust being thrown in the air by all of our plants.
I like that word, love dust, yes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we know. Buy a neti pot or a lavage. Make sure you have some Flonase on hand, a couple of different types of seasonal allergy medicine, and whatever you do, stay away from Afrin. I want to thank Dr. Gita Fleischman today. She's an ear, nose, and throat doctor at WakeMed. And if you have thoughts about any episode or questions you want me to ask in a future episode or ideas for an episode at all, send me a message in the link. You'll find it in the show notes. Thanks for listening.